Hi, welcome back to Broken and Brilliant. I'm Carrie O'Toole with Carrie O'Toole Ministries, and today I am joined again by Amy Van Tine. Hey Amy, nice to have you again.
It's good to be here.
Thanks for coming back. If you didn't get a chance to listen to our first podcast with Amy, please go back and listen because Amy is a mom of 4. How many are adopted?
1.
Okay, just one.
Well, now
okay,
1.
Now.
Yes.
And
I
isn't
had
this
2.
the question?
This is that odd piece of, well, is she still adopted?
How many children do you have? Did that question really bother you for a while?
It did, because
I
it
just
makes
said
me
4.
question how many do I have, because I've had to relinquish one.
Yes, me too. And so we share this in common, and I'm sorry that I just said parent of 4 because I am a parent of 2, not 3, and you are a parent of 3, not 4.
Right.
So go back and listen to that first story to get
That will explain.
to explain this whole deal. But you started an organization called RAD Advocates. Can you first of all describe what RAD is, and then tell us about your advocacy group?
Sure. So RAD is a developmental brain disorder that develops in children somewhere between the ages of utero to 5 or 7. It just kind of depends who you talk to on what the cutoff range is. So it's a developmental disorder that actually prevents the child from being able to form attachments to their primary caregivers. And it's based on the attachment cycle of when the baby had a need, the need wasn't met, the baby continues to cry, and all kinds of things happen in the brain at that point.
Yeah, and it creates a sense of fear, a very deep sense of fear, and it creates an inability to trust.
Inability to trust, a great need for control.
And all kinds of maladaptive behaviors that these children use to survive in their world because it's so scary.
Right.
But
And the key word is survive.
Yes.
They're just constantly in survival mode because during that attachment phase, they were never consoled or nurtured
Comforted.
or loved to be able to get over that attachment piece.
yeah, so they live in constant fight or flight and will come after anyone who tries to interfere with that.
Yes.
Yeah. I remember talking to a friend of ours who ran a group where they would deal with these kids and provide treatment. And he said that the way, if you think about reactive attachment disorder with the RAD, the way these children react to attachment is disordered. So with a child who is attached, when you move closer to them, they move closer to you.
Right.
When you tell them I love
creates a
you,
tighter bond.
it makes them feel good and comforted and warm. These kids, it causes fear, panic, anxiety, the need to push you away.
Right. And oftentimes, so when they go into the flight, fight, or freeze mode, it actually triggers them even more. They can live in that constant state of hypervigilance because they're in a nurturing home, a loving environment where it is all about connection and attachment. So they're already triggered. And then when we push more to connect and love and to try to help meet their triggers, that triggers them even more. And oftentimes, then you have a family that's in complete crisis.
24/7.
24/7, yes.
Yeah. So tell us about your group. How did you decide to do this? Because first of all, you're still parenting.
Yep. Yep, it's still parenting.
Which is a full-time job.
Yes. Yeah.
And now you've taken this on. So how did that come about?
Yeah, so really it came about when, so we had our experience with our daughter who has reactive attachment disorder. We ended up having to terminate, which was very painful.
Yes.
During that process, I found a lot of support in the social media groups that are geared specifically, for families or parents with this disorder. And once we had our daughter in a secure placement that was RAD specific, I was able to kind of breathe a little bit more I felt comfortable because I knew she was in a safe place that was really working with her disorder, that understood the disorder, that understood what it was like in our home environment. So we were able to relax a little bit more. And I would go on those support groups and I would read other people's stories, and it would break my heart. And if it didn't break my heart, it would infuriate me.
Yeah.
It was either one extreme or the other. And I just remember sitting there one night going, I can't do this anymore. Ethically, I cannot do this. I cannot sit here after what I've experienced and what I know is going on and do nothing. There are families falling apart. Children who are being placed in homes to have their forever family that is now being forced to disrupt. There are innocent children that didn't have trauma prior to bringing in a child with trauma into their home that now are suffering severe trauma. And it felt like the outside world just didn't understand that. There was like a disconnect between the professionals that help families and children with trauma and what was really going on.
Yeah, and I want to speak into that because I am a professional, but I was the mom first, and that was really important to me because when I went to grad school, I kept thinking, I'm going to learn all about this. There is nothing. And I asked one of my professors, when do we get something on attachment? I mean, that's the key to trauma. That's the key to
relationships in the future.
Exactly. Addictions, all this kind of stuff. Attachment should be the base of everything. Right. And this professor said, well, you might be able to get something at the doctoral level. It's like, are you kidding me? Yeah. And then I took some specialization on attachment stuff. 16 hours worth. They covered attachment disorders for about a half hour and didn't even know what they were talking about.
No.
And if I raised my hand, well, they're a professor. I'm not.
Right, even though you have the hands-on experience. And I think that's really what we're trying to do as RAD Advocates, is we're trying to bridge that gap of we have insight of what this disorder looks like in the home, and we advocate for families. We come alongside of them, and we are essentially their voice.
In what type of situations?
So there's a bunch of different situations. So anything from supporting a family of helping them to find proper care for their child, to speaking to the school of working through IEPs and what does attachment disorder look like, and how can the community and the village come and support that child and the family.
And so that the child's not triangulating with the people at school.
Yes,
you guys step in.
Yes, and explain how there's triangulation. Because oftentimes, whether it's the school, whether it's with social services, whether it's with a therapist, oftentimes when the parent themselves are trying to advocate for themselves and speak to what's going on with the disorder in the home, for lack of a better word, they look crazy.
I coach parents, and one of the things I talk to them about is we prepare them ahead of time, and it's like, how do you get grounded before you walk in that conversation? And I warn them, if you don't do this, you are going to come off as crazy, and no one will believe you, and now the problem will all be about it's a poor parent.
Right. Well, because the piece of that then it shifts where the issue really is.
Yes, and nobody's getting help.
And it's pointing at the parent or the parenting techniques instead of truly the disorder. And so what we have found is by being the third party in those meetings and speaking to what's going on, it's viewed differently by the professionals because they're hearing it from a third party and not directly from the parent who is living it.
Well, because the parents at that time are also immersed in their own PTSD.
Absolutely.
And so if they get triggered, which they will in the middle of one of these meetings.
Because you're literally, there's times where you feel like you are fighting for your survival.
Either
you
your
begging
physical survival or your psychological survival. Yeah.
You're begging for people to come in and help you, and when they are completely missing the bus of understanding what's happening, it can
trigger, and mom can go from 0 to 100 in 0.2 seconds, and then she looks crazy.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's where that's where we recognized there was a need to really advocate for these families and to bridge that gap with professionals. So we provide trainings to professionals, whether it be CASA workers, guardian ad litems, therapists, teachers, first responders. We do trainings for parents because sometimes they're so thick in it within their own home, and they're again in that survival mode that they don't really have an understanding of what is going on or why it's not working, and so we can educate on the disorder piece. So we do that.
Well, and you have the compassion, because a lot of these parents, it's hard to educate people who are in the midst of trauma because they can't see past their own pain. And so we have to, what I've learned is we have to really empathize with what's going on and validate what their life is like, and let them know we see them and we hear them and it's valid and they're not crazy and we know it. And then as they start to feel understood, their wall comes down a little and they breathe a little, and you can see that, and then you can speak.
Often what I hear is, oh my gosh, you're an angel. I don't know what I did without you. You're amazing. And really, where that comes from was my experience in it. I have the experience, so I know what they're going through.
Right. Wow. Okay, so if we've got viewers who are watching, and so you've said working with CASA, with guardian ad litems, with schools, with IEP meetings.
We're a part of, oftentimes social services gets involved, whether it's through a false allegation or whether it's self-reporting on the parents' end of just trying to seek help. So we're involved in that process, kind of helping to create the narrative from the very beginning of what this disorder is and trying to keep it on the straight and narrow so it can't be misconstrued as all kinds of other things going on that's not going to be helpful for the family or for the child. And so we're a part of family team meetings. We're a part of creative solution meetings with the state, with state Medicaid. We've been involved in court hearings through juvenile justice systems. Explaining to the judge what the disorder looks like. Just pretty much however the family needs our support, we come along and do that. We're not necessarily a support group, but we are advocates.
You could point them to.
Yes, absolutely. We have those resources where we can help them find support groups, but we're more of that third-party advocacy group that's going to be walking through it with them, helping them understand what the court system looks like if they've gotten involved in the courts, helping them with the school system, even their therapists to come alongside and to help explain to the therapist, because there's very few therapists that specialize in this disorder.
Well, and sometimes they'll tell you, I remember interviewing therapists when we were needing them, what do you know about attachment? Do you know about attachment disorder? And they'd say yes. And then I'd go in for a meeting, and I remember sitting there feeling like I'm educating you. You don't know, and I know more than you do.
Right. And I think it's because they're getting it from that book, or their experiences from maybe another client they've worked with, but it's still coming from that book home
knowledge.
study. Yes. And so
it's one thing to read about how you need to be grounded and centered 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and you need to have dealt with your own traumas before you bring a child with trauma into your home. It's another thing when the child is pushing your button 24/7, and
I think that's the big therapy right now is deal with your own trauma so you can deal with a traumatized child. But the reality is even if you dealt with your own traumas, when you have this level of trauma coming into your home and this child is purely reacting to your home,
and to you as a human,
to your love, to your nurturing, that's creating a new set of trauma. It's not re-triggering your past traumas that you haven't dealt with to then learn how to parent through it. It is truly creating a new set of traumas.
And it certainly is important that parents who are going to parent traumatized children have dealt with their own, because imagine if you had all of that
compounded on
top of. But we can't prevent this. We don't know how to do that yet.
No. And you had touched earlier on attachment issues. Well, I firmly believe there is a clear difference between attachment issues and attachment disorder. And so a lot of the therapists out there believe that they are attachment specialists or that they understand that relational piece. But until they understand the disordered brain, the developmental piece of it, I don't think that they really understand reactive attachment disorder.
Right.
And
And a lot of therapists do not want to describe it. There's a whole
stigma
about it. Lots of therapists don't believe it happens. People believe that you're giving this child a death sentence if you give it to them because there's no healing.
Absolutely.
And it's not true.
But it's not about that. And so that's the other thing we are about is, we have to name it for what it is before we can treat it.
And a lot of people now are using the term developmental trauma disorder, which I like it a lot better, but so far it's not in the DSM, so we can't use it.
And it's still kind of an umbrella over the whole attachment issue versus attachment disorder. And, as RAD Advocates, we meet with a lot of professionals and stuff. And some of the feedback that we have gotten is, you might want to change your name. The professionals, the caseworkers, the therapists, the
change it to
guardian
trauma
lions,
advocates,
yeah,
attachment
they
trauma.
don't like the word reactive attachment disorder. That's putting a label. But the reality is, until we call it for what it is, that's what it is in the DSM. Until we break that stigma, we're not going to know how to heal families and heal these children.
Well, and we're not trying...
Because it's truly a family disorder.
Yes,
It's not just a child disorder.
Right, it disorders the whole family.
Yes.
And it's not that we're trying to label these children.
No.
We're just trying to figure out we can't help if we don't know what it is.
Right.
And many,
And it's beyond an attachment issue.
Yes, and many of these families, they have the alphabet soup of diagnoses because typically with RAD, there's also either FAS or ODD or PTSD, GAD, and
DMDD.
These are, you can Google them.
Yes.
Parents of these kids, we know them all. And every time you get a new diagnosis, the parent has to learn stuff that their counselors never even learned. And it's hard to find because it's not written out in a course like you could get if you took a college course.
Right.
So you're having to be the researcher, the teacher. You have to disseminate the information and then be able to teach it to everybody else. So basically I felt like I had earned a graduate degree just in trying to learn all about my son's disorders.
Absolutely.
And so then finally my therapist said, why don't you go actually earn the initials?
Go do it.
So I did.
And that's where RAD Advocates can come along now, is we can come and we can be the ones providing that education and hopefully really bridging that gap between professionals and families. And we want to work with the professionals. We want to say, let us help show you what this looks like so we can have a treatment plan that is going to be effective, whatever that looks like.
Now, you're located here in Colorado.
Yes.
Who do you help?
We help families all over, not just in Colorado, but all over the United States. We've even have talked to people in Africa, and we've talked to a family in Alaska. So really, we help families all over. That's where we're at now. Eventually, we would like to grow and have physical bodies in every state, but right now we're here, and so a lot of it is done by conference calls.
Right.
I'm able to be conference called into family team meetings with social services, or I'm on the phone when the police are showing up to educate the police why mom's going to look crazy saying my child just did XYZ, and the child
looks
going to
totally
appear perfectly calm. I'm able to talk to police officers that this child needs an evaluation, and can you at least transport the child? And again, you're getting a third party involved, so they're questioning, maybe this child does need an evaluation. So we're all over by phone and conference calls, and if we can be there in person, that's ideal.
Yes.
But for right now, we cannot not do anything, so we're doing what we're physically able to do.
Wow, that is absolutely fabulous. Now, how do people get a hold of you?
So you can reach us at radadvocates.org. and through there, our email and our contact information. Okay. We're also on Facebook, RAD Advocates. It is RAD, but there's a space, R space, A space, D space, Advocates. We're on Instagram, Twitter.
Okay,
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Amy, I want to thank you so much.
Thank you.
Just think about what you're doing now and what I needed.
Yeah. Well, and for me, it's been a purpose in the pain. Mm-hmm. It's really helping me to heal through my grief and my trauma by helping other families.
Well, absolutely, because if you could prevent this from happening to somebody else, and that's why I do what I do too, you know?
Yes.
Otherwise, what was it worth?
Right, right.
There has to be.
And to help the children. Like, I mean, parents of children with this disorder can see so clearly what their future holds. And that is so painful for us, so painful. And so if we can be up there and advocate and try to get services that these children need, early intervention, and maybe change the trajectory for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for what you do.
Yeah.
It's
Thank
so
you
important.
for what you do.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Well, we got to stick together.
Yes, we do.
Thank you so much. Well,
Thank
everybody,
you.
Thanks for joining us again. And once again, if you want to get in touch with Amy, we'll have the link at the bottom of the podcast. And so we will see you next time here on Broken and Brilliant.